a little bit about us, maybe we're interns at the Hyde Park Jazz Festival over the summer. So we've been doing a lot of work for them, kind of planning different events and doing these kind of interviews with different artists that will be performing at the festival in September. So yeah, Carthus,
Great.
if you
Yeah,
want.
and I just want to say again, my name is Zikartha. I'm a sophomore at the University of Chicago, and I'm an intern with the Hyde Park Jazz Festival this year. And yeah, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your music, what kind of music you play and compose, and what traditions your music is in, and anything else you'd like to say just to start us off about yourself?
Sure. Well, my name's Ryan Cohan. I'm a pianist and composer based in Chicago. Over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, I've been, well, let's see, yeah, over 20 years. I've been recording and performing jazz throughout Chicago and traveling nationally and internationally a bit. I focus a lot on composing, and composing has informed my playing in many ways in terms of how I've approached the music. I've come at it from both angles, historically and from a compositional perspective, but my composing has encompassed a lot of classical music elements and world music elements, and writing and working on that type of music has informed my playing in many ways. And let's see, I've played with, many great jazz artists, and had the opportunity to work in many studio settings outside of jazz as well, and as well as some of the commercial music that was being recorded in Chicago many years ago, and also being involved in some film music as well.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Actually, you mentioned like different music from around the world, and I was really interested in, you had this jazz ambassadors with the Rhythm Road where you
Mhm.
toured with your quartet, and so I was wondering if you talk a little bit about, or yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience, and maybe some of the value of traveling and specifically like engaging with local music in different cultures.
Sure. The first tours that I had done with that program were in 2008. And it was really an incredible experience. Sometimes, some of those superlatives can be overused, but in the context of this tour, I keep thinking about it, and the lessons I learned from it and the experiences were truly incredible. And to this day, I think about them, and I'm still taking lessons from them. Basically, the program was to promote cultural exchange to parts of the world that maybe did not have the most favorable impression of the US. And in some places, they definitely did not. And it's a program that goes back, to the 50s. Dave Brubeck had done a version of this, and many other great jazz artists. So it's a program that was still existing with the U.S. Department of State, that at the time Jazz at Lincoln Center was managing, and they sent groups out to different parts of the world. So the first tour we did, I've done 4 tours with the State Department, 2 with Jazz at Lincoln Center, and 2 directly with State Departments in different countries. And basically, what we did, the first tour, we were in East Africa, and we were in 4 countries in East Africa. And then we also visited the Middle East on that tour. And then the second tour we did with them, we were in Russia and Belarus and Ukraine. And then I've been to Kosovo with this program, and then back to Ukraine again. And what's really remarkable about it, it was all about making connections through music, and jazz specifically, which is a uniquely American art form. And we really had to approach these interactions, these performances, these workshops in a different way than going out and just performing, a typical concert or a typical master class. Because in several of the locations, we would walk into community art centers or performance spaces in places where they really did not have a good impression of the U.S. And their impression of it was from a very tightly controlled state media, which, as we learned over the years, it's come on both sides too, because our impression of what we were seeing when we were going to some of these places was very narrow from what we were picking up in the in the newspaper and the media. That was not a comprehensive look. So we would go into some locations, and there'd be a fairly sizable audience just kind of sitting there, very, their arms folded, just kind of saying, "What are these Americans going to do?" And like kind of wondering what's up. And we really had to adjust our approach of, it was about connection. It wasn't about, in terms of the types of music that we were playing, especially coming from the perspective of jazz, we really had to choose what we were going to do and present ourselves in a very, very vulnerable and very open way and inclusive way. Which, frankly, what I've taken from this experience is that as an artist, that's kind of like ground zero. I think what you want to be doing is connecting with your audience and showing them something in a very open way and inclusive way. And what they saw was, just from seeing 4 musicians, 4 artists playing, and being there in earnest, really wanting to. Our whole mission was to play music and to share music. There was nothing else. And they saw the vulnerability, they saw the openness in what we were doing. And, music truly, it's sort of a cliche, but it's really true, is music is truly a universal language. So in a lot of the areas we were visiting, first stops were in, East Africa and Rwanda and Congo and Zimbabwe and Uganda. Music is a profound part of the culture. It's part of the religion of many of these cultures. So there was a point, music is this international language. So they saw something very familiar in us, and immediately the guard came down, and then, and in most of the places, many of the places, we couldn't speak their native language. But music was a language that we can all connect with. And so part of it was we'd be playing with local musicians. So we'd play a little bit, and then musicians would come up from these communities and play their, music that's, native to them, that they're familiar with. And then a dialogue would happen. The beauty of jazz is its inclusive nature. Immediately we just start listening and improvising on what they're doing and playing sounds that they are familiar with. And the connection that happens is fast and it's real and it's pretty deep. And especially when these folks in both sides, us and them as well, all have a very limited understanding or perspective. And then it's like, you see the humanity, you see the human beings together. And then it goes from a very stoic and very suspicious way of kind of first these audiences coming in and thinking about us to by the end of the performances, like a very warm, hugely warm reception by the fact that we're listening. And that's the nature of this music and what it should be. It's about listening and connecting. So we experienced that so many times throughout these tours. And it really affected my perception or my concept as an artist and what it means to connect with an audience. You take all the elements of, the business of this. It's not about any aspect of the business. It's strictly, how can I connect? How can I be vulnerable? What are the musical components that are going to reach this audience? It wasn't going to be, when we were in Africa, it was not going to be some very dense harmonic, music that we had been practicing or shedding, like to try to come over and, try to, get over in our minds, sophisticated ways, like the getting into the academia of the music, that we would have completely lost them. And we really realized we have to connect on a visceral level what is something that we can connect on a visceral level? And many of these places I realized also just the value of rhythm, like approaching the music. It's all about the feel and the rhythm. It's because it transcends everything else. It transcends, as far as the part of the communication, it transcends anything we could say to try to talk to them or explain. And we also, at the time, we had heard there were some high-level diplomats that had come to these areas. Like we were in Rwanda, and I think at the time, it was like, Senator Clinton was there, and she had given a speech, and they didn't like something that she had said, or it didn't go over well. She had to present like American policy and then try to connect with some of her, the people that were there. And somehow the conversation got off on a wrong way, and it didn't make a favorable impression. Whereas music, it has a power to transcend in ways that words cannot, and make a meaningful impact that's lasting. So that was kind of the general gist of it. And we've had many of these experiences, different parts of the world. And I brought that home in terms of how I'm approaching music.
No, thank you. That's really fascinating. And it sounds like a very eye-opening and evolving experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that really beautifully speaks to like the ability of music to reach a little deeper than sometimes words and cultures and politics and preconceptions can, and music kind of cuts right to the bone, and you feel it instantly, and you can feel it connection even if you can't describe it in words. And I think it's really beautiful that you said it's kind of a reciprocal thing, that part of what you were doing was bringing American music and uniquely American ways of making music, and trying to show that to other cultures that wouldn't have a favorable view of America. But also you bring something back, you learn about their music, and I know you incorporate world music influences into your own music that you compose. And so I guess I'm interested in how you manage those influences and how that looks when you're creating music, how you incorporate those kinds of other cultures that you've been exposed to, and how you synthesize that into your own music. And also how, I guess there's a little tension between the free improvisation aspect and the jamming and just playing, and then the compositional aspect, and like you talked about, the harmonics and all kinds of academic theory, and the nitty-gritty details of arranging chords and progressions. And how do you balance those sides of making music and make a product that's uniquely yours?
That's a great question. One like prime objective had with my own music over the years has been that in the end, the music is felt by the listener. It finds a listener, it moves them. If I am earnest and I'm vulnerable and open, like when I'm creating, when I'm trying to write something, hopefully that will connect with the listener, and that they will open it up. The mood or the emotion will connect, and then the listener will fill in the details from their own experiences, and hopefully the feeling is there's a universal element to it. And what I've thought about since I really started writing music was that all the mechanics, again, I put, like I say, sophisticated, because sophistication can be in the most simple, the simple gesture, but the most dense or really advanced harmonic ideas or rhythmic components, that stuff can be those materials, and those are important. And I love studying harmony. I love studying the master jazz players and composers and classical like contemporary classical music, and studying it from an academic perspective. I love that, and I appreciate that. But with my music, I want, when I'm presenting something or written something, for all those components can be under the hood of the music for those that want to find it. It's there, but that the take home for the music is that it's felt in a in those elemental ways. And how to do that, like how do I, like I like to just follow in terms of all the elements of music that are out there. It's just staggering. I don't know if it's infinite, but just like, there's so much music out there in the world, and amazing music that are lifetime pursuits, thousands of lifetimes to go to one corner of the world and study some master from India or or go to somewhere in wherever, Syria, and then, go to somewhere in Cuba. Those are lifetimes of study. And, I try to just follow what I love, what moves me, and try to communicate, a story that is my own, but with, concepts or emotions or experiences that there's a universality to it as well, and follow what I love as the connecting thread. And so, I've always loved music that has a real strong groove component. I approach the piano in many ways as the percussion instrument from the family it comes from. So I'm really moved by, rhythm and driving music that's driving. And so I'll hear music from different parts of the world that all have this component. And so, it's like, oh, I love this rhythm, this rhythm that I'm hearing that's got this sort of Middle Eastern, root to it. And then I'll connect it to something else, to its, an African, rhythm that kind of similar, that they're, these rhythms are getting derived from each other. And, the aspects of, African music and, Latin American music, or, Cuban music, or, and I see it as all one. It's a color. And I never try to reproduce this music is like that. I'm trying to present it like there are masters of this music that if you want to go hear a certain style, I'm not trying to reproduce it, but you could take these elements of this music and combine them, and if you serve them up in your own way, that's something that you're really trying to tell your own story with it, and you study the mechanics of it, and you're respectful of the styles, and you study them. You could bring them together in a way that is hopefully telling your story. And that's the beauty that I see of jazz. One of the beauties of it is that it's all inclusive music. It takes all these different components from all over the world, and it still remains jazz. And it brings musicians from all over the world together. And I've seen that going, traveling internationally, musicians all over the world, they love jazz. They love the history of jazz, the artists, and the nature of improvisation is not uniquely jazz. So that is something that is familiar to, music all over the world. And so, musicians from all over the world, there's a commonality to it, but jazz incorporates all these things. So I try to, I follow the thread of what moves me in terms of some type of, coherence for it to be coherent. And then, hopefully the music impacts at a music that in a way that you feel it. But for those musicians that that are that can see it or that are interested, the music that I write, I'm studying all kinds of music all the time. Like you can go under the hood of the music, and there's you can find a lot of academic components academic for lack of a better word, but a lot of studied parts of it that I admired, that I wanted to, be respectful when I'm learning this music, to try to bring something to it. And so that's how I approach it. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. That was just a really insightful answer. And I see what you mean, that it's like the academic side is there and it's to be appreciated, but it's the really immediate impact is felt without having to even look at that or know anything about it. The listener just connects with it. And then if you want to go looking for the bones and the skeleton of it, it's all there. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's those are values. That's how music that's important to me. And I like I can appreciate the others as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really insightful how you were thinking about jazz as something that can incorporate that, and that's what keeps it so fresh, and that's what keeps it so accessible to different places around the world. I think that's really awesome. You mentioned improvisation and using the piano, thinking about the piano while you're composing. I was a little bit curious because you have such a background in both composing and performing. And so I guess I was a little bit curious, how are these two different? How do they relate to each other? How do they come together? And maybe if you want to talk about improvising in particular, how does that play a role in composition?
Hmm. For my approach to it, and I've seen this evolve with the writing that I've done over the last 20 years of creating a larger work, let's say, and where it's very compositionally oriented. I am conceiving something that's a suite or something that's a longer form work that I'm following. I'm trying to develop themes, and I have specific writing that I want to occur in this piece of music where it becomes it's a funny thing, like, I've thought about this, where does it, like, where's the line of jazz, and like, and then it's like more formal music, like, is there a line, and where it's almost like because you can have jazz musicians that are really phenomenal jazz musicians that are just some of the best improvisers in the world, and it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for them, or their thing is not to be playing something that's really written out, that's like 30 minutes long or something. There's musicians that do all of it, and then of course there's classical musicians who are amazing interpreters, can read anything, and they would play part of the composition that's written out, like they could play it incredibly well to a certain extent, because there's a feel component too that comes from studying, that comes from jazz, that you study from just developing a sense of feel, which is a certain ineffable quality to that. Big part of it is an ineffable quality that you absorb it, you listen to recordings, you go to jam sessions, you play, in countless sessions, you hook up with mentors, and then over the years you get a sense of what that feel is, and that comes from doing that. So you're marrying these two elements, or what I've done with my work over the years is elements that are very written, and then parts where you wanted to have the improvisation, how to bring those together. And of course, I've been fortunate. There are some, there are many incredible musicians out there that walk that line, that can do both. From my own perspective, what I found with what I want to do with my writing is I'll develop, the deeper I've got into writing and studying composition, a lot of my work gets more detailed, where it's almost more, for lack of a better term, again, like classical or formal composition. But I've also realized as an improviser, I want to have forms where there's not as much content to have to navigate when it comes time to solo. So one of the ways I bring those together is I am trying to incorporate not just the fact that there's chord changes that the player has to improvise on, but that the forms are more open and without a lot of targets that they have to hit and navigate, so that after the composition is being stated, or maybe even during the composition, that there's sections when it comes to the improvisation where it's really limited material and it's relying on the improviser's instincts to tell the story, to push the story of the composition forward without a lot of written, signposts in the improvisational section, where it's not as formally written out, with not necessarily a ton of chord changes, not necessarily a ton of hits points that they have to make in the composition, but it's more open. So it's relying on the sensibilities of a great improviser to be aware of the context they are in of a large composition that has a lot of thematic development and different ideas happening more than a tune, and that they are going to bring that to the improvised sections that are more open. It puts a tall order on the improviser. They're not going to just play a blues that's just, unless maybe that's part of the composition, but it's not just going to be just play whatever, you know, licks you've worked out over the chord changes. You have to be telling a story. If you just have one chord to deal with, you have to have the range of knowledge of being able to take that and go into all kinds of whatever harmonic places that just starting on that one spot will be, and be a storyteller in your approach to improvisation that everybody in the band is going to respond. So it's a tall order to have all those different elements, from being able to play very formal compositional parts to then being an improviser that has the skills, the harmonic understanding, the technical, instrumental, ability, and rhythmic range to do that. And so I do think of that. The compositional sections are very composed, but that when it comes time to improvising, I am trying to think as an improviser, as a player, and embedding that in the piece.
Yeah, I really think it's very fascinating how you approach both sides of those, and also how you're able to bring them together and maybe access those different languages at different moments. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you for that. And now we've talked a little bit about how you approach the music and a bit of your philosophy, and we've talked about playing overseas and in different places. And I want to just bring it back home and ask about playing in Chicago, and what do you find special about Chicago, being here, the other musicians in Chicago, and also if you've played or attended with the Hyde Park Jazz Festival before, and if you have anything to say about that, that would be great, just to hear your thoughts on the local aspect of jazz in Chicago.
Yeah, I've really grown to appreciate the artistic scene in Chicago more and more over the years, and it runs deep, and it seems to be expanding. The musicians here are just hungry and just dedicated to the music, and there's some fantastic, incredible players here, and they want to play. So it's a really fertile ground for developing your craft here, because if you want to play this music, there are clubs to go out, and I mean it's like any other city. It's there's a handful of clubs, and there's way more musicians. So there's that's going to be present in any major, well, in not just, that's not unique to Chicago. That's a common element. But the hunger to play here, you're looking for gigs is one thing, and you're trying to go out and play gigs. But in the meantime, as you're just building your craft, there are just a lot of musicians that are hungry to play, that you can do jam sessions and hang out and be playing a fair amount, and to really cut your teeth here. And there's a wide variety of musical styles in Chicago that you can kind of get into, and you can be doing gigs in one type of focusing on jazz or other type of music, one style of jazz or different variations of jazz, and then different world music that's happening in Chicago. And if you're a player, you can, and if you're really driven and you're really trying to get out there, you can be playing and playing in these different scenes and growing here, which is a wonderful place. And Hyde Park has always been a special place for me. My family came from Hyde Park many years ago. It's a special community I always loved, and I always feel, and it's always a special, it's a special thing to play the Hyde Park Jazz Festival. It's just got an incredible community vibe there. The people are really behind the festival and supporting it. It's got a wonderful diversity, and it's just there's a sophistication, but sort of a real rootedness at the same time, and a lot of history in that part of the city. And so it's always special to be a part of the Hyde Park Jazz Festival.
Thank you. And we're looking forward to seeing you there in September. Just to wrap it up, do you have any other upcoming projects or concerts or new directions that you want to let us know about?
Well, I'm developing a few different things. I'm not sure what form they're going to take yet. I've written some big band music recently for a project that I have that I'm considering doing more with, recording. I've also have more music that I've been writing for the group that I worked with for my latest project, Originations, which includes woodwinds and strings. And I've been working with my quartet a bunch. I have a trio gig coming up September the 7th. I think it's a Wednesday, the first Wednesday in September at Winters. And then I have some different dates on my website with some, wonderful artists that you could check out at ryancohan.com. And, so I'm going to see where these projects I'm working on are going to take form, and, these different groups. And hopefully I'll be having some more of these things recorded and out there soon.
That sounds fantastic. I'm very excited to hear you and your different performances and recordings.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for talking to us today. It was really great and fascinating to hear from you, and give us so many insights in a relatively short interview. So we're really glad we got to talk to you, and thank you very much, and good luck with everything in the future.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me.
Of course.